All right, so Kevin, we got the holidays coming up. You ready for them?
Yeah, I'm ready. There's the traditional end of the year stress when it comes to buying the gifts and wrapping the presents and hiding them so nobody sees them. How about you?
I feel pretty good. I mean, there is a lot to do, and it's always annoying that it's like you want to enjoy the holidays, but you got everything to do all at once, and yeah, a little stressful. But you feeling pretty good?
Yeah, I mean, I am a little nervous though because I do have two nieces due within the next 6 months. So my
Oh
brother
wow!
Andrew is expecting a baby in January, and my brother Jack is expecting a baby in June. So there is a
Wow.
little bit of stress about figuring out how do I get involved in the lives and also figuring out, okay, where do I stay out of the way to avoid creating any messes. But it's a mixed bag. But yeah, stress is in there.
That makes sense. I mean, yeah, it's always hard to deal with the unknown, and you know, you're so you'd say you're pretty not too nervous, but nervous enough.
I'm concerned. I'm concerned. That's what I could say.
You can't be as concerned as I remember this story you told me about Bing Crosby and how he had part ownership in the team, the Pirates,
Yes,
and
the Pittsburgh Pirates. Yes.
yeah. And in 1960, he was so nervous about the World Series that he flew to France and could only listen to it on the radio. He didn't want to be anywhere near it because he was that scared.
Oh man, talk about superstition. I mean, we all do our own. We all try to avoid stress, but I don't think I'd fly to another continent to avoid it. But I guess when you're Bing Crosby, you can do whatever you want. And it's very interesting because Bing Crosby, this is not some random story that we're thinking about, because Bing Crosby is relevant today because he is one of the stars of your movies this week, correct?
Yes, so I picked White Christmas, and he is one of the four very talented leading stars in this film. So let's get into that.
Coda, since this was your pick, I have to ask about your experience. How were you introduced to it? What was your first time watching it?
So I was trying to nail down the year. It was probably either my sophomore or junior year of high school that I saw it, and it really got me interested in some of the whole process of filmmaking, and also the kind of, we'll talk about it later, but some of the efforts with the restoration and stuff. And I was like, wow, there's a lot more to this than you would think. And as a Christmas movie, it's fun because you get a lot of different things. You get the actual movie, but you get a lot of entertainment along for with the ride.
Yeah, because most of the songs are written, if not all of them, are written by Irving Berlin, like one of the greatest American songwriters. And he was involved in Broadway, obviously, but he's a staple of American culture. And
Oh yeah.
here you are. We have this all out theatrical musical, this Christmas musical, and
Yes. So this was your first time watching it, and you had some interesting thoughts.
I actually saw it on TV briefly when I was a child. I think I was about 10 or 11. I walked in the room and my dad was watching it, and they were singing "I Wish I Was Back in the Army," and they were setting up for the White Christmas finale. And being 10 or 11, I'm like, whatever. I just walked right out.
It wasn't your channel surfing kryptonite.
No, it was not, as our friend John Krasinski has pointed out. No, no, no. Especially when you are 10 or 11 years old and you think you know quality entertainment.
Yeah, it's a little corny, but
Well,
I think as you get older, you kind of appreciate that more.
yes, 2 decades later, I sit down and I'm watching this through Amazon Prime, and I have to say I was very impressed. I mean, it was a theatrical movie. It was a musical movie, and the way I would say it is it indulges entertainment at every possible moment.
And it's interesting because the stars of this movie, to do that, you have to be able to do more than just act. You have to be able to sing, dance, and act. Triple threat.
Well, let's wonder how widespread that'll be nowadays when you have AI. I mean, maybe Leonardo DiCaprio is not a good singer or dancer, but you get the right technology in there. You can just get him to do his dramatic reading or his comedy reading and then just throw that in there.
Well, I think of like "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," and George Clooney has the big musical number, and he's just lip syncing the whole thing because he can't sing. And another connection to this movie, his aunt, Rosemary Clooney.
Oh, yes, yes, indeed. Rosemary Clooney is also a star over here. I'll never forget that Billy Crystal was raised by a jazz record producer, and he had a lot of jazz musicians coming in and out of his home throughout his youth. And he made the remark that Rosemary Clooney would go in there every time and say, "My nephew is the sexiest baby ever."
Oh my goodness! So let's get into some of the details about this film.
So it was released October 14th, 1954. And you know how we've been complaining throughout our lives about how, oh, they're advertising Christmas earlier and earlier every year. I mean, this has to be something new. It's like, no, they were doing this in the 50s, the booming post-war period. They probably were doing it in September, too.
Yeah, also Halloween wasn't probably as big back then, but still, I mean, that's pretty early, October, mid-October.
I mean, you know, you got to get some people in the mood for it. I mean, It's a Wonderful Life, a Christmas movie, one of the most iconic Christmas movies of all time, but it was released in January.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it must have been some scheduling issue.
Yeah. Oh, we got to get ready for the holidays. We don't have time to get that out till the new
Hey,
year.
they had just finished World War II. They're excused.
Yeah, that's a fair.
Yeah, Jimmy Stewart actually served in World War II.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Which I think would have been very interesting had Bing Crosby or Danny Kaye served in World War II, because they look like they could have very well been there. As you see at one point in the movie, the introduction is in World War II, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But this movie is released in 1954. The theatrical rentals earned $12 million. That's $136 million today. It ended up being the highest grossing movie of 1954, which also included flicks like On the Waterfront, which won the Best Picture Oscar that year, which we're going to be talking about that at some point, too.
That's also really interesting. I mean, holiday movies are big, but to be the biggest of the year, that's crazy.
I mean, in this circumstance, I can believe it. I mean, because it does it all. And the box office grand total was $30 million. And this was all on a $2 million budget. So we want to talk about return on investments.
Yeah, that's is that the best one yet?
I don't know. I mean, it's 15 times that. So, but it's all relative. It's $30 million compared to like $200 million for some of these other guys like Good Will Hunting and company.
That's true.
So as I was doing my research on this, I found out. So I didn't recognize the name of this director, but he's a big freaking deal. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but it was a European, it was a Hungarian name, Michael Curtiz. Somebody can, one of our 2 or 3 listeners can correct me on the pronunciation later.
Yeah, maybe we'll get the Hungarian audience engaged.
We'll get Jordan Schlansky to come on and correct us.
I'm sure.
The director was incredibly prolific. He had already accomplished 64 films in his European career, and he was invited by Warner Brothers as they were really starting out. And he was a major catalyst in the studio's growth. He had this incredibly diverse filmography. The swashbuckler genre with The Adventures of Robin Hood, dramas, Angels with Dirty Faces with Jimmy Cagney, and then he did a musical with Jimmy Cagney, Yankee Doodle Dandy, and above all, I didn't know this, he directed Casablanca.
Yeah, you sent me, did you realize how big a deal this guy was? And I was like, the name doesn't, but then you look him up and it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, he's got quite an extensive resume. And here's a very interesting bit of trivia. He's the reason why there's animal welfare laws on film sets, because when he was filming this movie, I don't know the rest of the details about this movie, but it was called The Charge of the Light Brigade in the 1930s. He was filming a scene with a cavalry charge, however you pronounce it, and it led to the deaths of 25 horses.
That's awful. I mean, imagine today if one of the horses got even a scratch on it, the outrage. Understandable, but back then it was just like, write it off.
Well, I mean, the other problem, too, is especially when it comes to horses, if they get injured, depending on the injury, they can't lay on the ground and recover like we can because it messes up their digestive tract. So if they get a broken leg or something, they have to be put down.
Yeah, or I've seen like the whole sling apparatus to kind of help them, but it gets expensive, and yeah, it's hard.
It's exhausting. I've seen it firsthand, and it's just there's so much that goes into it. And the other detail that we were talking about was that the songs were done by Irving Berlin, and the title of the movie is White Christmas, and that came from the song that he wrote for the movie Holiday Inn and won the Academy Award for Best Original Song.
Yeah, a lot of people kind of forget that movie had quite a bit of influential impact into both film and music. But yes, that is technically the prequel to this movie.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one, but just I would have thought that this was the original song for this movie. So as the film opens up with Bing Crosby singing it in the European theater in World War II, you have to imagine the original audience had a little surreal moment of watching the original singer perform it for a movie.
Yeah, because it only came out a few years after Holiday Inn, and it's kind of like, whoa. Okay.
About a decade, I think.
Yeah, it was, but yeah, it's not like it came out 50 years later.
So why don't we go into the cast? So we've talked a lot about Bing Crosby and George Clooney's aunt. Bing Crosby as Bob Wallace, so he's a Broadway star, as we see in the beginning of the movie, and he eventually forms a duo with Phil Davis, played by Danny Kaye, a fellow soldier in World War II. Then there's Rosemary Clooney, as we discussed, playing Betty Haynes, who's part of the Haynes sisters duo, which the other half, Judy Haynes, is played by Vera Ellen. And one of the more important supporting roles in this movie is Dean Jagger as Major General Tom Waverly.
Yes, the sassy general who owns the resort that they end up at.
Yeah, and I gotta say, the way they portrayed General Waverly was just wonderful, because to me, it was this whole perception of like, okay, he's in control. He knows what he's doing. He's a military leader, but he cares about the guys who serve under him. Just the way how he dismisses his replacement general in the beginning by saying, send him down to the shortcut. And they say, there is no shortcut. It's like, yeah, I wanted to give the boys about an hour and a half of like good times.
Yeah, it's nice because he uses this kind of like, it's a, pretending to be kind of mean, but it's to be nice, and it's teasing. It's fun. It's a good sense of humor, very dry, but
it's like roasting in a sense.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the whole thing about roasting humor is that because it's all based on insults. So you can only use this kind of humor if you have an established bond with somebody. So it shows how much how well established their relationship is and how much he cares about everybody. And also when Crosby is giving the speech, when Wallace, is giving a speech about how much they'll miss him, he cuts it off and says, okay, everybody get in line right now. So he's a humble guy too.
All right. So we start off, as you said, in the European theater of World War II.
Yep, right in the middle of urban warfare. There you see Bob Wallace, played by Crosby, and Phil Davis, played by Danny Kaye, entertaining their fellow troops in the middle of like a city that is blown to smithereens, and you can hear the booms and the blasts and the lights from the other bombings in the city, and they're serving under General Waverly, we spoke about earlier.
All right, so then after their performance, we see a little military action because they are under siege.
Yes, and while they may be indulging in the theatricality of everything when it comes to show tunes and song and dance, they're really not investing too much in the stunts department for simulating an action or a war sequence, even for that era. But it's all right.
They just got to do it to get you to the next scene, because this is not a movie about USO shows during World War II.
Yeah, this is not Saving Private Ryan, and even that had some of its historical inaccuracies. In the midst of this combat, Davis is wounded, but Wallace saves him, and after they survive the attack, they decide, let's start a duo together. And they basically become another version of Rodgers and Hammerstein, and like, song and dance and just touring everywhere at the top of their game. And
Yeah, they would have been pretty big stars. This time, I mean, live entertainment was still something a lot of people would have been going to.
yeah, and at that time, it's also blended into the new medium of television at the time.
Yeah.
So not only did you have the theater and the cinema, but you also had television. So it's getting blended into all those, in addition to radio.
Well, yeah, television they didn't pre-record a lot of this stuff. So
Yeah.
you would have live performers and they would just put on a show and that's it. It goes out live.
Yes. So while they're performing in Florida, they receive a letter from an army friend who suggests that they scout his sisters act, the Haynes sisters, Betty and Judy. And in the midst of this, you find out, okay, Davis is a little annoyed at how crotchety he thinks Wallace is. And he's like, come on, why don't you get married?
Yeah.
And, he's really proposing, like, I need to set you up with somebody. And they eventually meet the Haynes sisters, and he gets the idea, I'm going to set him up with Betty.
Within like the first 5 minutes of meeting them, it's
Yeah.
not like this is some, they knew. No, it's just like, okay, well, she's the first person I see. Let's,
Well, I mean,
set them up.
I think that's also the trope of the era movies, like at the time. So it's like, oh, yeah, let's just fall in love with somebody right away.
It's that easy. It just happens.
Divorce is not that common at this point. Yeah.
Kind of hit it off.
Yeah, they do. Not only does Davis and Judy end up dancing, going all out, just going around a certain corner at one point, and they go out into this all-out choreographed dance right there, which is totally realistic.
I want to talk about that dance for a second because it's pretty interesting. There were only, what I counted, 7 different cuts in that.
Yeah, that was the other thing. It does seem like, because there are as few cuts as possible, it feels like a theatrical performance.
Yeah, so these shots would go on for like 48 seconds, 25 seconds, 25 seconds, 22, 42. So these are long takes. And what I think contributes to that is, again, these actors had the ability to do the dance numbers, do the music numbers. Even if you wanted to nowadays do these long moving shots, you'd have to chop it up because somebody screws something up. Yeah, you could, if you get people that can do the part, sure. But if you're just hiring somebody because they're a big name and they don't know how to do it, you're going to have to fix that in editing, and it's not going to look like this.
Well,
so they really leaned into that.
Well, give it about 50 years. Like I said, AI will take care of everything. Leo will suddenly become the next Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, but I love that. And you really got to see them start at this section, leaning into some of the theatrics, that not just for a screen, but using some of the stuff you'd see in stage movement. You use a lot more of the vertical space. And you pointed out that there's a lot to the cinematography here, too.
Yeah, I noticed that where everybody's positioned on camera and the way everything's angled, where they're all, it looks like they might as well be on stage at the theater, because there's that fourth wall setup, like all the chairs, everybody's sitting by each other like that. There really isn't much like, across the table shot or anything else, any tracking shots like that. It's like, it's almost as if you're watching it at the theater.
Yeah, and it's almost like you get different perspectives within the theater, but it's never crossing that basically proscenium line, and you're watching it as somebody who's watching a theater show.
It was very impressive, but like I said about the theatrics and the song and dance, part of you does get a little meta, is like, how often do people break out into all-out song and dance like that without any prior rehearsal? But like when I went to go see Spamalot, the Broadway adaptation of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which we also covered, there are so many moments where a chorus emerges where there wouldn't be one, and that was kind of the point of it. I showed you the clip of the Not Dead Yet clip, where the chorus that breaks out is all the dead people on the dead people cart.
But the interesting thing is, it's not it wasn't even modern necessarily at the time this movie came out. You think of like Cole Porter and some of his shows, they also leaned into like, why are we singing and dancing now? There's in Kiss Me Kate this whole number,
Yeah.
it's too darn hot, and it's just kind of like this. Okay, let's just do a musical number to give the actors a break.
Well, I mean, it's also the thing about these entertainers all being together in this movie together. It's like, let's indulge entertainment at every possible moment. Let's entertain the audience every second we can. I mean, that's why you have some song and dance numbers in there that don't make sense at all, like choreography.
Yeah.
I mean, just imagine pitching to the investors, we have to sing a song, we have to do a routine that has nothing to do with this plot or Christmas themes. We just got to keep entertaining the audience.
Well, at this point, we do get into a song and dance that actually does advance the plot a little bit. The Sisters Sisters number.
Ah, yeah. So after they perform, they watch the Haynes sisters perform that one, and they realize, oh, the sisters are being framed by their landlord for destroying their property, and they have to flee because there's an arrest warrant out for them. And so Wallace and
arrest
Davis.
warrant. What an escalation.
Yeah, I gotta say, in all my days renting, I've never been worried about a landlord filing an arrest warrant for me.
I think tenant protection laws have gotten a little more advanced, but yeah, it was pretty intense. So they have to help the sisters escape out the back window of the theater and get into a taxi.
Well, and they have to buy time as well, so there's an encore performance of Sisters. However, it is not performed by Judy and Betty. It is performed by Wallace and Davis.
Yeah, they put on the record that the sisters sang, and they just lip sync along to it, and somehow amazingly just know all the choreography after seeing it one time. But
yes, absolutely, it's the theater. As they are fleeing, they eventually get onto a train to New York City, and the Haynes sisters tell them, oh, well, why don't you come with us the rest of the way to Vermont, because we're due to perform at, what's the name of the inn? The Columbia Inn. And when they arrive over there, who do they find out is in charge of the inn? Who owns the inn? Major General Tom Waverly.
And I love the way they kind of set this up, because he's a little older, and if the audience didn't totally remember the beginning, but they immediately go into salute, and his thing he always says when these people are doing that is the thing that they would say in the military, at ease. Like, okay,
yeah.
we don't have to do this right now.
Yeah, they salute him. Once they see him, they're caught off guard and like, oh, he's here, and at ease, and they say, but I love the self-deprecating joke that goes in there. They see him carrying all the firewood, and they said, how'd the general end up as the janitor over here? And he says, it's worse. I'm the owner.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you can tell, business isn't going very well, and Bob and Phil agree to put on a show to help benefit the inn and Waverly. And in this
to be
time,
clear, this is a ski resort. This is a place that relies on snow. So there's no snow. There's not much business.
yeah, we should point that out. So they're arriving at the inn, and they're thinking, oh, this will be great because it'll be a chilly, snowy time of year, especially for Christmas. But when they get there, it's 60 degrees, and they're like, oh, shit, we're going to have a problem. And in this time, Phil and Judy have really been pushing their luck, saying, let's try to set up Bob and Betty and everything. And a romance does blossom.
Yeah, it's clear that they like each other, but there's a bit of friction, and they try to become a bit of a lubricant for them.
Things are getting a little rough because Betty overheard, well, not Betty, but the housekeeper, Emma, overheard Bob on the phone with Broadway producer friend Ed Harrison talking about, hey, let's get a show going over here. And Emma gets off the phone at one point, and when she puts it back up there, she thinks that, oh, we're intending to make a profit off this. We're intending to exploit the general's misfortune so we can enrich ourselves, and passes along to Betty.
Emma is like a professional busybody. She's played by Mary Wickens.
Yes. So she was like a musical comedy relief character, was she not? Like
What I
life?
actually recognized her from the first time I saw this was The Music Man. She's one of the Pick-a-Little women that does that number. But yes, she's kind of this theatrical, over the top kind of actress that does these roles, and it's like she is the town gossip.
Yeah, she is. And unfortunately, she passes her misunderstanding along to Betty, who, loses her interest in Bob.
And at this point, the entire thing driving the plot ends up kind of being this misunderstanding, and that's what kind of hooks the audience along for the rest of the ride.
Yeah, I mean, it's irony. It's kind of like how Romeo is not aware that Juliet is faking her death, and he ends up killing himself for her.
Yeah.
How many other plots are based around that? Judy and Phil are thinking, well, we got to get them together, so why don't we pretend that we're getting together? Why don't we pretend that we're falling in love and getting engaged? But unfortunately, it has the wrong outcome on it.
Yeah, they literally announce an engagement, and the housekeeper's popping champagne, and they went a little far.
Yeah, very insensitive for Betty, and so she decides, I'm going back to New York City. I'm going to do a few solo shows while I'm there. And Bob ends up down there at Ed Harrison's show. Let me just make sure that's it. Ed Harrison. And after Betty has performed over there, he tries to make amends while he can, but then he goes on camera and asks everybody in his division in World War II who served under Waverly, please come to the Columbia Inn for General Waverly. And she gets the full story. Oh, he's not trying to make any money off of this.
Yeah, he doesn't just say, hey, guys, come. He does a whole musical number, What Happens to a General When He Stops Being a General. And it's this whole, again, another song that goes on. And it's just there because let's entertain the audience.
Yeah. But it's a good way to get the message out. I mean, what happens to all the veterans when they're done fighting? And so when they get back to Vermont, Betty and Bob have reconciled, and they're putting on the show, and they're setting up the general at this point. They're like, okay, we got a crowd down here. We need you to look your best. And he's like, well, what happened? All my suits are gone. All I have is my military uniform. They're like, oh, just put on the military uniform. And once he gets down there, he sees everybody who served under him in their military uniforms. And
yeah, they're all saluting, and he does his at ease, and then they proceed to do this kind of mock uniform inspection, and he does one of his kind of dry, well, this is a total disgrace, and
I've never been more humiliated in all my life looking at this miserable group of people,
but I could not be more proud. And he turns it around to that kind of, hey guys, I'm just roasting you.
But there is the appreciation that you see in the moment, because this guy has been dealing with so much financial hardship. He's trying to get his business going, and just to see everybody over there saying, we're still happy to know you. We came here to show that we appreciate you.
Yeah, well, he's kind of at a impasse, and the fact that people really do care about him really helps him kind of come to terms with the reality that he's in.
It's like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to have bad business, but I got all these people over here who are going to support me. After that, they perform their all-out White Christmas the next day. And this is an incredibly extravagant set that has been designed with particularly the contrast of the two main Christmas colors, red and white, with everybody's wardrobe, but also the Christmas tree over there. And if you're going to do a musical number about the Christmas season, I mean, if you need an example of set design to aspire to, if you could mimic anything, it's this scene in particular.
And it comes across in full glory. It's just totally decked out, sparkly, and it's what you think of if you're like, I just want to walk into Christmas. That's the place you would go.
Yeah. And in this moment, Bob and Betty have reconciled, and Phil and Judy themselves realize, hey, we actually are in love with each other. Let's get married, in that little kind of cheesy old-time Hollywood way. But as they finish the song, they open the back doors, and what do they find? Snow.
It is fallen down, and they now know we're ready for business. And they got the sleigh, and it's just an iconic shot. I love it.
It is, yeah. So Waverly got everything he needed in that moment. So he got a show to benefit him. He got all of his former troops to come back and say, "We love you, and we're always thinking about you." And he got more business because of the snow.
Everything tied up in a nice bow.
I mean, so not only is it a good story, especially, but it's also great character development, and it all ties together.
Yes, and I think it would be interesting to talk about one of the interesting things that allowed this movie to really come across as beautifully as it did on the big screen.
This is actually a pretty freaking big deal because you were talking to me about this when you recommended this movie. This is the first movie that has ever been shot in VistaVision. Now, our listeners probably saw it on some of the posters for some of these classic movies before, but they don't know what it is. So, Coda, how would you explain to your average moviegoer what VistaVision is?
So, to understand VistaVision, you have to understand this kind of movement at this time. As we talked about, TV was becoming a big thing, and now film had to start to compete with that. So what kind of things would get people out to see the show? They had Technicolor, and now most movies were in color, and then they had to come up with something else. So different companies came up with different things, stuff like CinemaScope, where you have the really wide screen. It's not that 4x3 boxed in like you would see on TV. And VistaVision was Paramount's response to this.
And a thing that I would point out to everybody else over there, the 4:3 ratio. So some people might not get the scope references that we're discussing, but to go back a little further, in the last 20 years, when you bought a DVD, there would be the option for full screen or widescreen. And this was more along the lines of widescreen, right? Yes.
You get that kind of
yeah, with the black
really,
bars that we originally saw when we first watched DVD saying, "Hey, how do we get rid of this?" But now I zoomed in, but I can't see anything.
Now, the interesting thing with VistaVision is, unlike the CinemaScope where you're still using your vertical and you just have to switch out a lens, VistaVision was horizontal. It was still using 35 millimeter film, but basically it would have to run through the camera side to side, and you got a much bigger frame because that you were able to use a wider mask, basically. And it would be similar to like 35 millimeter photography, that full frame. So you got a bit more resolution, and you also got a wider image.
Yeah, and what a movie to get everybody's attention with that. So you have a visually impressive movie, a theatrical movie with song and dance. But let's think about the other options at the time. They were doing a lot of 3D movies in this era, were they not?
They were. It was this kind of challenge of, can we get a gimmick in? And it worked so well for this movie because we talked about it's very theatrical, and it doesn't totally need that crazy of a gimmick. It just needs something to really let it all come across on the screen.
Probably just to push the envelope, not to like go all out with that. So that's, we saw a lot of movies really try to go all out with 3D. I mean, we talked a few weeks ago about The Hobbit. When the Hobbit trilogy was released and they made it in 3D, I was like, why are they making it in 3D? I mean, I enjoyed the Hobbit movies. They're obviously not as great as the original Lord of the Rings, but it was the 3D aspect to it. It's like, okay, are we overdoing it a little?
Yeah. And the interesting thing about VistaVision is there was a little confusion that I think should be cleared up. You may see some more recent than White Christmas films where they, in the camera technical specs, they'll say they used a VistaVision camera. Now, that's not the same as like a full movie in VistaVision. This is basically them using that camera technology that gave them the bigger frame on 35 millimeter film. And a lot of people like that for special effects. So Star Wars utilized it. Mm-hmm. They utilized it even in Interstellar because you wanted a little more information there, because every time you make a copy of a analog media, you lose a little. It's called generational loss. So the more you can start with, the better. And if you don't want to go up to 70 or 1570 with IMAX, you can use the 35 millimeter and just use more of the space that's available there.
So why would we call this a Christmas classic? Now that we're at it. So people watch this almost every year. I believe that the Coolidge Corner Theater even has an event devoted to this. So why would we consider this a Christmas classic beyond the fact that, oh, it's set at Christmas and it's a good movie? Are there any specific themes that distinguish it from like a Halloween movie or a 4th of July movie or any other holiday?
Yeah, I think that the concept of caring for others, because this movie really shows the idea of doing good for somebody else. They see that the general is very kind of sad deep down, and they think, how can we bring some joy to him? It's not, oh, let's, give him, an expensive present or something. It's let's give him something meaningful. And that's a big thing around the holidays, is thinking of others and what you can do to have them have a little joy.
Even with other holidays, there's really no generosity theme like Christmas. You don't do that with Memorial Day. You don't do that with Easter. You don't do it with any of these other holidays. But it seems to be this is the one time a year that we do this. And as some people pointed out, this is centered around one of the coldest and darkest times of the year. And we can just surround it with warmth and brightness and happiness. And it's the great juxtaposition to inspire us to keep going.
Yeah, and we talked about the irony, too, kind of. It is inherent in the season, and it also comes through in this. And you get those comedy bits, and, you think about being around with family, and you have a lot of funny moments that are exchanged. So a lot of those parallels to the actual season do occur in the movie.
Yeah, I agree. And there was another thing that we were talking about earlier when I had finished discussing this. We were having a little back and forth. Do you think, because you mentioned this and I was thinking about it, was there's a hint of Shakespearean storytelling, and like particularly with the matchmaking here?
So yeah, if you think about Shakespeare, you're the theater guy more so, but I know
Not as much.
A bit about it. But you have either a tragedy or you have a comedy. So the idea of a tragedy is usually it ends in death, and a comedy ends in marriage. So you think like A Midsummer Night's Dream, there's all this kind of shenanigans, but how does it end up resolving in weddings, basically? And not only that, too, you think the comedy in Midsummer Night's Dream, the entire driving part of that, the middle of that story, is this: everybody's not on the same page. So it's that resolution of, oh, we know that this is happening, but that character doesn't. And then you see them kind of try to navigate that and then actually resolve the conflict.
Yeah, another thing I was thinking about when it came to irony over there is in the very beginning when they're performing in the ruins of a city for the troops, and they get to when Wallace is singing White Christmas, and as he's singing this wholesome song, the camera's panning around showing all of their fellow troops in the cold and the discomfort. They got sad looks on their faces as the song is talking about their wholesome Christmases back home that everyone looks forward to, and they're in the middle of a war zone.
It's like we talked about in the intro. The holidays are supposed to be fun and joy, and it's one of the most stressful times of year.
Mental health. I mean, there's the seasonal affective disorder, SAD. It's called that for a reason.
Yeah.
And it's quite unfortunate that the time of year that we're trying to be the happiest is also when we're the saddest. But it's that extra effort that we put into it to make sure we don't go anywhere near those thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you recommend the movie to other people?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally worth checking out. It's an icon of American film and entertainment. And, you know, we everybody's heard White Christmas, and they probably heard several other songs that have been performed in this movie. And it's totally worth checking out. I mean, I told you, like, one of the influences that I saw as time went by was Danny Kaye, being the incredible physical comedian. He kind of did remind me a little bit of Cosmo Kramer.
You said that to me, and I was like, I could kind of see it. Very slapstick.
A very tall, lanky guy, kind of a little similar hairstyle, but, not crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, and the thing with this movie is, even if somebody doesn't totally love the story, which I think would be hard to have happen. But let's say they don't, they're still going to be entertained because you have all these musical numbers, and you can just enjoy those.
Yeah, I mean, totally. And it's also, you're seeing Bing Crosby perform right there. And if you also, maybe somebody's not fully won over by all the merits, but you just tell them that's George Clooney's aunt, and they'll be like, oh.
Yeah, it's funny because I always thought of her as very much in the musical trained performer, and then George Clooney is kind of he's just the big guy in Hollywood. And then you said
the Cary Grant of our day. The Cary Grant of our day.
And you said that she was his aunt. I'm like, I don't know how I didn't make that connection, but yeah, it runs in the family.
All right, so Christmas is in the next few weeks. Do you have any plans so far?
Well, going back to Albany and then taking a trip to Florida for a bit and then back in Albany. So it's busy. How about you?
I don't have any concrete plans yet, but I'll pull something together. You got anything on your Christmas list so far this year? Any gifts you want?
Not specific. The trouble is, we talked about this last year too. As an adult, you tend to just buy things if you need them. So it's harder to kind of ask for things at Christmas time.
Yeah, because you have the ability to buy anything any other time of year, whereas when you're a kid, you're like, okay, I depend on mom and dad for everything.
Yeah, you get two opportunities. You got your birthday and you got Christmas. Easter, you might get some candy, but those are your two opportunities, and you got to make the list. And you have to make the list. You have to be a good boy.
Oh, yes. So that's the other thing, the naughty or nice list. Coda, which list do you think you're on this year?
I think this year I'm probably on nice, but it's hard. Who's judging?
Yeah, the way I'm looking at it is like, look, I haven't hurt anybody. I haven't stolen anything. Just give me my damn presents.
Yeah, as a kid, it's like you don't brush your teeth, you get on the naughty list. Now it's like you really have to screw something up.
Yeah, nowadays as an adult, you're open to far bigger mistakes. And the best part about like not brushing your teeth was that they could just put you on the phone with Santa, who was just one of your parents' friends, just putting on a little deeper voice. You're like, I'll do whatever you tell me to do, Santa.
A nice dangling of the carrot.
Yeah, well, I'm guessing that's what I'm going to be now when the nieces come around. So brothers are just going to randomly call me and say, okay, Kevin, I just need you to pretend to be Santa right now, okay?
You should lean into the full, like, Krampus and, well, in Germany, they beat you if you're a bad boy.
Austria, yeah. So, I mean, I have a little bit of Austrian heritage, so I should try to say, hey, guess what? We got a new way.
We'll stuff you in a stack.
And just run away with you.
Oh, yeah, you might get CPS called. Don't jeopardize that.
Yeah, how on earth, I mean, particularly like being some guy who has a little bit of Austrian heritage, how did my ancestors pass that down without thinking, it's not going to hurt the kids at all? I mean, they didn't physically get hurt.
It's kind of maybe the generational trauma. It's like, well, I had to deal with it as a kid, so I'm going to pass along the terror.
Yeah, we'll channel it through alcohol.
All right. So, Kevin, it being the holidays, you also picked a holiday movie that we'll be getting to after Christmas because we got to get ready for those holidays.
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of fitting that we're doing this one immediately after Christmas because we mentioned this movie at the beginning of the episode. It's a Wonderful Life. You know what? Let's go for it. This is not just a great Christmas movie to air every year, but it's one of the best told stories on screen, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it, and we'll have people stay tuned. But next time, be sure to tune in for It's a Wonderful Life.
Yes, we look forward to seeing you next time.